This is Grace Notes. I'm Alan Button, and pleased to have as our guest today, Michiele Elliott. Michiele, welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
We've invited Michiele to join us because of some volunteer work that she's involved with in a special way that relates to her nursing background. But there are a lot of things sort of history-wise and music-wise we could talk about. We may get into some of that along the way, Michiele. But let our listeners know, first off, speaking of your nursing background, that you worked in the Department of Health and Human Services in Raleigh for 25 years. Have I got that right?
That's correct.
And as I understand it, your focus was to a large degree on mental health services. True?
Yes, that's been the primary focus of the bulk of my career.
You retired in 2022, but didn't slow down a whole lot, as I'm told. And a significant part of that relates to your work with an organization called H3. Tell us what H3 is.
H3 stands for Hope, Health, and Healing. And it's a nonprofit organization that was started by a retired physician, Dr. William Hall, and his wife, Cindy Hall, who was retired from being an outreach minister. And they had seen a show on street medicine and thought that might be something they could bring to our area. He and his wife went to a street medicine conference and learned a little bit about what was entailed with providing services to people without resources. We have clinics every Tuesday and Saturday morning at Bread of Life Ministries. We also have clinics at the men's shelter, the women's shelter, Haven, and El Refugio.
What's your role in all of that?
My role as a nurse is primarily mental health. So Dr. Hall or one of the other physicians will direct someone to me who has a mental health need. Perhaps they have a history and were on medicine but are not on medicine anymore. Sometimes people just present with, behavior that seems very different, or speaking to them and trying to find out what's wrong with them medically, we discover that really they're having difficulty with mental illness. And so those are the folks that I kind of take aside and sit down, talk to, try to find out a little bit about what their current situation is, if they've ever had mental health services, what we might be able to do to help them, whether that's medication or trying to hook them up with some local services here.
I know there's a lot that you can tell us in terms of stories and people and impact, and I'd like to come back to that in a bit, but I want to weave in a little bit more about your background, your personal history going back a few years, because it relates to this first song that you've selected. With that as a segue, tell us why Color My World is one of the songs you've decided to have us air.
Color My World is a song by Chicago that was my husband's and my song when we were in high school. And this December, we will have been married 50 years.
Uh-huh.
And he was a huge Chicago fan and introduced me to Chicago in high school. And this song just really talks about how love colors your world. It really brightens, it brings life to your world. And, certainly at 16, I heard it one way, and now approaching 70, I hear it a different way, but it's still our song.
You mentioned to me that you have learned something about love over the years, maybe not so much from your own family. When I say your own family, your family growing up, but in your relationship with your husband and no doubt your own children.
That's true. The family I grew up in was not very loving. And when I met my husband, he is very, I wouldn't say he's unique, because I'm sure there are other men out there who are very loving and also very strong. But he showed me what love looked like. And I think I told you earlier that I know that at 16 we were not smart enough to pick our life partner. So I think part of that, a huge part of that, was divine intervention. That you had two people who perhaps didn't have what they needed from their original families, but were able to find it together and then build it. Because I think with our children, we tried to be as loving as possible and to say the things that often don't get said in families. You know, I love you, I'm proud of you, I will always be here, things like that.
What's your husband's name?
Preston.
And I understand from our conversation before we came into the studio that he's got special music interests himself, and that has had an impact on you.
He does. When we went to college, he became a DJ in a very tiny little dorm radio station at the University of Florida. And so he discovered all sorts of music. And I was down in Miami. He was in Gainesville. And he would send me 45s through the mail. And I would play them. So he exposed me to a lot of music, like not only Chicago, but the Moody Blues and Emerson, Lake and Palmer, and all the classics from the 70s.
You two grew up in Florida.
We did. We grew up in Orlando, Winter Park, actually, which is right outside Orlando. My husband moved in one house down from me when we were 16, and we went to high school together, and we dated in high school. Our parents decided that things were moving too quickly. We were too devoted to each other. So his parents sent him, or mandated that he go to the University of Florida, and my parents sent me to the University of Miami. And that didn't last very long. I think it was one semester of bad grades because we were traveling back and forth. The Greyhound bus trip was 6 hours for me. He had a car. And the long distance bills, which we still have a couple in our memory box of long distance bills and our parents' letters back to us about them.
That's terrific. Well, Michele, let's hear the song. Great introduction from a couple of 16-year-olds. Here's to Michele and Preston, Color My World by Chicago. That was Color My World by Chicago. If you're just joining us, our guest today is Michiele Elliott. This is Grace Notes. I'm Alan Button, and I'm here with Michele. We're talking about, well, her personal history, but also her history as it relates to her volunteer work currently since her retirement in 2022. Her volunteer work with an organization, a nonprofit group called H3, which stands for Hope, Health, and Healing. Michele, maybe you could pick up again by giving us some specifics about who the clients are. You volunteer in your capacity as a nurse and deal particularly with mental health situations with respect to clinic clients. Have I got that right?
You do. That's correct.
Tell us more about the patients.
The patients that are served by H3, it's really a wide variety of people who, some people are without housing, and they're the people that you see on the street or maybe in the library on a hot day, cooling off. We also have quite a few people who work, but they don't have health insurance and they don't have a lot of resources. We see people of all ages, children to older people. Most Saturdays, we'll see about 20 patients. We have gone, our lowest is probably 15, and our highest one Saturday was 50.
Wow.
We have a handful of doctors. We have Dr. Jessica Sloan, who is a currently practicing physician. We have Dr. Marty Pate, who's a retired physician, Dr. Briggs, and Dr. Hall. We also have nurses. We have several retired nurses, a pharmacy tech, and we have volunteers. The role of volunteers who aren't nurses is primarily greeting people, welcoming them to the clinic, getting them signed in, and making sure they get what they need. They may just need to see a nurse for medicine or blood pressure, or they may need to see the physician for a health need. We see lots of people with chronic illnesses such as hypertension and diabetes. We see a number of people with mental health needs and substance use. We do see people who are currently using substances and who are often impaired. And sometimes we can still see them and help them if there's a wound or something. We had 2 people who came recently who were sharing a bike together, and they fell off the bike and got injured. So they had some wounds on their legs. They were very, very high and not able to communicate with us in a super effective way. But it was easy for the nurses and doctors to at least see the wound and address it. And I think those 2 folks left maybe not understanding the full scope of what they experienced, but knowing they were helped in some way.
Can you give us a sense of the range of mental health situations that you confront?
It's interesting because we have patients who very clearly are dealing with a mental illness, a very significant mental illness, such as if you were to pass them on the street or if you were to encounter them in a store, you would, even as just a citizen or a caring person, you would know immediately they were dealing with something involving their mental health. And then we have other people who their mental health is well controlled. They've been on medication. They may have had insurance and a job at one time, and they don't anymore. And they need help getting their medication on a regular basis because that's what keeps them stable. We have lots of folks who have drug and alcohol issues, who interact frequently with law enforcement. One of the most important things I think H3 does is relieve some of the burden on our local emergency room, because people would present to the emergency room with their cuts, their scrapes, their coughs, their fevers, their rashes, if not that they had a place several times a week where they could see a physician. One of the things I value most about being a volunteer at H3 is the physicians, the nurses, all really mirror greeting people where they are, treating them with kindness and respect, giving them attention. Most of us can relate to going to the doctor and you feel like they're just kind of cycling you in and out. You wonder if you even really have their attention. And I am just thrilled to see our doc sit across from somebody who may not smell so good, might have a visible bed bug crawling on their collar, but give them their undivided attention for that 15 minutes and give them all the benefit of their knowledge. So it's really meeting people where they are, trying to help them with needs.
It occurs to me that maybe your experience with H3 is in some ways different from your experience with the Department of Health and Human Services in an office in Raleigh. Is that anything that you can shed some light on?
That's a real accurate description of the difference. I started out as a nurse working clinically with people, and eventually I became an investigator of complaints and worked for the Department of Health and Human Services, investigating complaints in nursing homes and group homes and hospitals. And then I kind of rose through the ranks and became chief of the mental health licensure section of the Division of Health Service Regulation. And we licensed all the mental health facilities in the state, hospitals, methadone clinics, group homes. And you have a whole lot of really dedicated people working for state government who work very hard on a system. But I think most of them would be honest enough to tell you that the system that we've cobbled together does not meet the needs of the people where the rubber meets the road. For people who are hurting, for families that are in crisis, you can call a number and then get referred to someone, then get assessed, then get referred to someone for an appointment, but it still puts you in the position of having to navigate this incredibly complex mental health or health system. And so what I appreciate about H3 is it is a very present, that moment. Let me see who you are, what do you need, and what can I offer you at this moment in time. So it kind of puts a realness to some of the policy and legal things that we might have worried about at the Department of Health and Human Resources.
Tell us about Shower the People. I know that having heard you and talked to you earlier, that you can make the connection between what you've just been describing and this song by James Taylor. Why Shower the People?
I think this song always lifts my spirits. It reminds us to make sure that the people around us know how much we love them. And I take this to remind me not only for my own family, to, when I think nice things about my husband, to actually say them instead of just think them, but also for strangers. You know, the person you see in the grocery store. I try to remember when I am interacting with people to turn off the phone or the radio if I'm going through the drive-thru to get my Diet Coke and actually focus on the person who's serving me.
And then remind them to turn the radio back on when you're done.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You want the radio. But I believe that the highest form of generosity is attention, paying attention. And so I'm not perfect at it. There are times when I'm certainly distracted. But I try to remember that if I'm interacting with someone, to pay attention, that moment is theirs. And that relates to H3 because I think that's what we try to do at every clinic. We try to remember their names and greet them by name. Remember their families. Remember that this is a grandma who's raising 3 little kids at the age of 68 and is worn out. You know, just so they know that they are important to you. And that's what this song says to me.
Yeah, for sure. And speaking of relationships generally, we never know when one moment will be the last moment to say something.
Exactly.
James Taylor says, do it now.
Yeah, James Taylor can always touch my heart.
Let's hear it. Shower the People by James Taylor.
You can play the game and you can act out the part, though you know it wasn't written for you. Show them the way that you feel right. Shower the
Michelle, I know you've had experience in a geriatric setting, and you were telling me something about the impact of music among folks in those older stages of life. Tell us about that.
I managed the geriatric psychiatry unit at Dorothea Dix, and we would receive people for whom their behavior or their condition had become so severe that it couldn't be handled in their homes or the nursing homes or wherever they were placed. And so these were folks who were really profoundly affected by dementia generally or some other mental condition. And the thing that struck me is the 2 things that could reach them when we couldn't as individuals interacting with them were therapy dogs. And the dogs would come on the unit and you'd see somebody that you couldn't even get a reaction from. Their hand would slowly drift down to pet the dog. The other thing was music, particularly music from their youth, the things they loved. I enjoyed my work there. I tell my husband, I have a really horrible singing voice and nobody wants to hear me sing. But because these folks, I guess, had such severe dementia, it's the only place in the world that I felt welcome to sing and they would enjoy it. But music was so powerful, and it has that same impact, I guess, on everybody, but I know it does on me.
James Taylor, maybe, in
James
particular?
Taylor. I've told my children that if I'm in a state where I'm unreachable, that they need to play James Taylor, and it'll bring me home. It'll bring me back to a place where I remember something. And I think that's what we saw with the patients we took care of.
Uh-huh. And I guess it's fair to say that most of us will either experience that kind of need to be reached personally, or we know people who are in or will be in that situation.
I think we all know people or have people in our families. I was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease.
It occurs to me that Parkinson's is one such potential issue.
It is. The majority of people with Parkinson's end up really dependent and end up with dementia. And it has a very long course. So I tell my children, hopefully that's 20 years from now. I don't know that. But I think knowing that there are things that will reach us even in the depth of maybe not being able to think clearly about who we are or where we are, that there's something that reaches back and kind of grabs you and brings a depth of feeling from a moment in your life when that music was important. That gives me great peace, just knowing that.
That ties in actually to something I wanted to ask you about sort of by way of wrap-up. What would you suggest or recommend to any of us who are dealing with others who have mental health issues? And I'm looking for whatever you want to say about that, but maybe in particular volunteer work and also within our own sphere of relationships.
I think one thing I'd like to say is that we all fight battles that nobody might be able to recognize. It's not like, you wear a T-shirt that says schizophrenia or bipolar. People all throughout our lives are dealing with things that we just don't envision. And if we can see through whatever they're presenting, even the person on the street who may look unkempt and dirty and mumbling, and you kind of want to cross to the other side of the street, you don't want any part of that. Think about the humanity and who that person is underneath the way they're presenting to you right then. The other thing that I think is important, if you have a family member or somebody you care about with a mental illness, it's hard to be patient. There's a lot of ups and downs. And we kind of want to say, well, just take your medicine, for goodness sake. It's not that easy. The medications we've given people have often made them feel lousy. And so people don't want to stay on their medication. So families end up on a roller coaster and crises happen. And I know it wears thin, it wears people out. But basically, our basic humanity is that we need to care for one another. And that whether you have a mental illness or not, I think most of us can agree that life right now is pretty hard and people are struggling.
A lot of people out there who are having trouble just sleeping.
Absolutely. And so if we can go out of our way, as James Taylor reminds us, to shower the love and be kind, to greet the person at McDonald's who takes your order by name if they've got a name tag on, and to smile and actually make eye contact. We have no way of knowing whether that is important or not, but I guarantee it'll make you feel better too.
Tell us about this third song, Michele. Why Forever Autumn?
Number one, because it's beautiful. It's just a gorgeous song.
That works.
And the imagery of fall, which is my favorite season, the leaves, the birds, the coming cold, the darkness. But it is a song about loss and longing. And, we've all suffered losses, and you can think about the losses in your life, certainly when you listen to this song. I can think about losses, but I think about beauty in the loss. That there are things that grow out of those losses that strengthen us, that enlighten us. Probably one of the biggest losses I've suffered was the death of my sister, which was unexpected. And in life, I kind of took her for granted. She was just my older sister. But then when she was gone, I discovered so many of her strengths, and I got to know her through other people's eyes. And she was an advocate for people who were without housing. She was housing attorney in Southern Florida. And she spent her career fighting for people. She felt like housing was a basic human right, and she fought for that. And so when I listen to this song, I think of her. She was tiny. She was like 5 feet tall and 90 pounds, but she was fierce. And I think of that Shakespeare quote, "Yet she be small, but fierce." Anyway, I think of my sister Janet.
How long has she been gone?
8 years.
Well, you're right. This song, it's I'll admit, a new one to me. It's been done by the Moody Blues. We're going to hear a version by Justin Hayward of the Moody Blues. But you're right, the imagery is just beautiful. I'm reminded that there is grief only because there's been love. So despite its sort of somber lyrics, there's real reason to rejoice in what has been experienced between the people described in the song.
Absolutely. We're lucky to have love in our lives, even though sometimes we lose it.
It's been a pleasure talking with you, Michele. Thank you for taking the time to come in. I look forward to your maintaining connections with us here at the station and commend you for your work with H3.
Thank you. This has been a pleasure.
Let's hear it. Forever Autumn by Justin Hayward of the Moody Blues.
The summer sun is fading as the year grows old. 'Cause you're not here.